All right, my next guest is such a fantastic guest to have here on the show because he and I actually caught up a number of years ago at the Super Bowl, and I really, really, really enjoyed our conversation. And when I go to work every day at SiriusXM, I pass by a couple of big banner ads that I'm just totally entranced by. It's the Life and Slimes of Marc Summers, and you have that green splat like the old Double Dare show, and I
Yep.
was just like, wow, this is so cool. So you know Marc from his years on Double Dare between 86 and 93 on Nickelodeon, also Food Network's Unwrapped. He was the executive producer of Dinner Impossible and Restaurant Impossible. And the Life and Slimes of Marc Summers is right now doing 5 shows a week at the New World Stage Theater until June the 2nd. So you can go, if you're in the city, check that out. Marc Summers joining us here on the show. Marc, how you doing?
I'm good. Nice to see you again. I guess, before it was only big sporting events, so now we can actually calm down and have a good conversation.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I think people don't realize that you're a huge sports fan, specifically a huge baseball fan as well, but you grew up in Indianapolis. So did you ever attach yourself to a specific baseball team?
Well, we had the Indianapolis Indians, which were a AAA American Association, which I don't think even exists anymore. And they were initially a farm club of the Chicago White Sox. And it was fun as a kid to see Claude Osteen as a pitcher go to the White Sox. And we had a guy by the name of Chico Ruiz who became, he was really a sprinter and he would steal bases. Then we switched to Cincinnati when the Big Red Machine was around. So get to see a lot of people go off to there. But I went to school in Boston, and my dorm was right across from Fenway Park. And you could get on the roof of our building and look down into Fenway. And, of course, when you don't have any money as a college kid, just seeing a third of the field is enough. That and all the beer you can steal. And it was it was a fun time. But now I'm a big fan, and I go to many games and hoping that we can have a winning season again. We need that.
Let me tell you, I don't think anybody figured they tune in to hear Marc Summers and hear Chico Ruiz reference. So you have now gotten major credibility amongst the sports fans. Major credibility.
Do you know who Chico is?
Of course, yeah. Old school, yeah. Speedster, as you said, couldn't hit, but could run the bases, could fly.
He was insane. I mean, he used to steal second base, for a living. And it was insane to see him for no reason at all take the base, and he would do it. And American Association, it would be like watching bad Little League games. They'd overthrow to second, and sometimes he'd make it all the way to home because nobody could catch him. But yeah, it was kind of interesting to do that. First major league game I went to, I don't mean to take up too much sports time.
No, go ahead.
I was at Comiskey Park, and it was the Orioles against the White Sox. And I remember we had great seats right behind the Orioles dugout. And I don't know if you remember this name, Gus Triandos. Gus Triandos, I believe, was the catcher for the Orioles. This guy had arms bigger than my entire body at the time. And the Orioles Gene Freese was playing third base for the Chicago White Sox. And he made 3 errors that day. And the crowd was booing him like crazy. And the next day he got up and hit a grand slam home run. And I think the scoreboard is still making noise. I mean, that thing didn't shut off. It was fantastic.
You got to throw out the first pitch at Fenway. I mean, how nerve-wracking is it to throw out a first pitch in front of the Boston fans?
Well, you don't ever want to screw up at any ballpark, but especially at Fenway, because that crowd could be brutal. And so I got up the morning of, went to a sporting goods store, bought 25 baseballs, went to a park in Brookline, Massachusetts, and threw balls for like 2-3 hours. And then they told me to get to the park at 5. I got there at 3. And I wanted to warm up, but they said the players weren't allowed to do it for insurance reasons. So they let me throw with the ball girl, and I went, oh, this is going to be fun. This girl threw so hard, I had to tell her to pull back. My hand was like bulging red. But so they wanted me to stand in front of the mound. They said most people do that. I wasn't going to have any of that. I coached my son's baseball team for 8 years. So I did it, and I actually have it on videotape, and it's still one of the biggest thrills in my life.
That is so cool. It's funny because, Double Dare is such an American institution, but we didn't have cable growing up. So I used to go over to my cousin's house, and this was right at the time of the height of Double Dare. And I was like, we have to watch Double Dare. And my cousins, they grew up on it as well. So it was always on in the house. So that's where I got my Double Dare fix. And I'm wondering now, when it comes to the audience that comes to your show, is it usually parents of children that grew up now having watched you, or do they know you from all the other things you've done in your career as well?
Well, I was at 86 to 94 was my full Double Dare run between, Double Dare, What Would You Do? And and then I did various other networks. I worked at History Channel doing a quiz show called History IQ, and I did a talk show on Lifetime. But it was 20 years at Food Network. I tell you what's so odd. I assume when people stop me for an autograph or a picture that it's a Double Dare reference, because that was probably the most popular show I ever did. But the other day, somebody was coming out of our show, Life in Slimes, and they said, "Can you sign my program?" And I said, "Sure. You want me to say anything about Double Dare or Unwrapped?" And she said to me, "What's Double Dare?"
Wow.
Yeah. So there's a whole
Wow.
generation only knows me from the Food Network. That was kind of a wake-up call, you know?
Yeah.
That was interesting.
So this show that you're doing, this off-Broadway show, Life in Slimes, is part kind of game show, part interactivity with the audience like Double Dare, but also part memoir. This is also your life. So how do you weave all of that together? That seems like such an interesting puzzle to try to connect.
Lucky because a man by the name of Alex Brightman wrote my show, and he wrote a bulletproof show. Alex is a major star on Broadway. He first did School of Rock as the lead, and then he did Beetlejuice as the lead. He just closed in Spamalot in one of the leads. He also did The Shark is Broken prior to that. So he's a brilliant performer, but he may even be a better writer. And he wrote this show for me about 8 years ago. I had always wanted to do theater and didn't have the nerve to do it. And I actually got asked by Mel Brooks to audition for the producers when they were taking it into Vegas.
Really?
I didn't go to the audition. When they first took Big and tried to turn it into a Broadway show, I was the first person they called to do that. I didn't go to the audition, too scared. But I hit a point in my life where I had a lot of, difficulties. I got cancer a few times. I was in a car accident where I broke every bone in my face and then came out and found out I had obsessive compulsive disorder. And it was just like one obstacle after another. And for whatever reason, I got enough nerve and did summer stock in Long Beach Island, New Jersey, playing Vince Fontaine in Grease. And that's where I met Alex Brightman. And he wrote the show for me. We started it in Bloomington, Indiana, 8 years ago. Then we did the Adirondack Theater Festival. And this summer, we were playing in Buffalo, New York, and playing 3 weeks in a local theater just for fun. And the Mrs. Doubtfire tour opened in the theater next to us. And the director of Doubtfire, Steve Edlin, came to our show. I didn't know that. Met me backstage afterwards and said, "Have you ever thought of doing this in New York?" And I went, "Yeah, but I don't know anybody there." He made one phone call, and 4 months later, I'm starting rehearsal here in New York, and we're here for a 16-week run. So it's a miracle, but I couldn't be happier.
So how did that happen? You got into a car accident and then realized you had OCD, because you then did a box set, I remember, back in the 80s or early 90s about your OCD to help others, right?
Yeah, I did a book. I was on Dateline. I was a national spokesperson for 2 years for the Obsessive Compulsive Foundation. And the way I found out is all the time I was doing Double Dare, I knew something didn't feel right, but I didn't have a name. And I was hosting this talk show called Biggers and Summers on Lifetime. Had a doctor on, Dr. Eric Hollander, who diagnosed me on the air live. And next thing I know, I'm on Howard Stern talking to him about it. I'm on Oprah. I'm on the Today Show. I'm everywhere. And so this show that we're doing now is about overcoming obstacles. Why do certain people, when there's a wall in front of them, figure out a way to go over, under, around, and through, and other people just sort of, pull back and go, I'm not doing that. And I don't know about you. I kind of have a feeling, and a couple of times we've talked, you and I don't feel like we've ever worked. We are doing exactly what we want to do because we're passionate about it. I can't imagine getting up every day, going to a job and absolutely hating it. And so I never accepted the word no as an answer. To me, no just meant not yet. We're not ready for you yet, or I'm not ready for you yet, but we figured it out. And I was 34 before I got Double Dare. And here I am, 72, doing an off-Broadway show and having the best time of my life.
That's really interesting. And I noticed when I went on to the Life in Slimes website, it said it's really for an audience that's 12 and up, because you guys do tackle mental health issues. So
Yes.
How do you weave that into the show, and what type of messages are there for young people that are, I'm sure, dealing with this both, intensely, or wondering about their friends, their classmates, or what might come down the road?
Initially, I think a lot of parents thought they were coming to see Double Dare live. And I walk out the first week or two, and there were the first 3 rows of a bunch of 4 and 5-year-olds. And this show is not for people 4 and 5 years old. We play Double Dare for 10 minutes as a reminiscence of that time of my life. But we talk about intrusive thoughts. I would have a hard time if I went into a grocery store and I would get fixated on reading a label. Sometimes I could stand there for 10 or 15 minutes reading the same thing over and over again until it was, quote, perfect in my mind. And the reason people with OCD do that is the intrusive thoughts are driven by the fact that you say, unless I read that perfect, something bad is going to happen to my kids, my wife, my parents. I used to have such bad intrusive thoughts when my son was playing baseball in Little League. I would say, unless I do that perfectly, Matthew won't make the baseball team, or Meredith won't make, she played a lot of theater roles. And I'd say, well, if I don't do that right, Meredith won't get the lead in the show. And so you put all this burden on yourself. And I thought I was the only person in the world who had these feelings. And so you keep it quiet. And it wasn't until Dr. Hollander came on our show and started explaining about repetition, intrusive thoughts, that I blurted out on live TV, I think I have this. Well, the next thing, I find out that more people have it than not. But when I came out in the late 90s, there was really not a lot of help out there. They did not have the medication that people could take. Cognitive behavior therapy pretty much didn't exist as it does now. And so we have many people who attend my show who have OCD, and they want to talk about it. They want to talk about what are their intrusive thoughts, what are their habits, because people with OCD have a rule book, but the rule book changes on a daily or weekly basis. What bothered you yesterday may not bother you today. Maybe you had to walk into a room on an even number and you walk in with an odd number now. And so your mind has to be basically retrained not to do these things. And we get into a pretty heavy part of that the second half of our show.
Well, I'll tell you, it's kind of mind blowing to me, and I'm in the business of being on air, to hear somebody such as yourself who have had those intrusive thoughts about dire consequences if you don't succeed, on top of the natural pressure that's in our job. I mean, people are listening, people are watching. Now with social media, they'll call you out for mistakes, they'll criticize you no matter what. And so I wonder just what type of mountain that is to climb, because I think many of us just try to go through it as you just got to shut all of that out and try to do your job. But what you're saying is your brain has never really allowed you to shut all of that out.
No, and once again, I never accepted the word no. And I think that a major reason I am successful is because of my obsessive compulsive disorder. I had people in LA tell me I was a pain in the butt. And they would say, I'll hire you if you promise you'll just stop calling me. Because if somebody said, call me, I would call them and call them and call them until they responded to me. Okay. Here's a great. I went to a place called Graham Junior College. Okay. This was a school for misfits. Who went to our school? Paul Fusco, who created Alf. Burt Reynolds, who created Sally Jesse Raphael and Jerry Springer. Andy Kaufman went to our school. So we had a lot of very creative people there. And it's just one of these things where I was surrounded by people who were creative. And my point of view was never to take a job outside of the television or radio industry. And so when I moved to Los Angeles in 1973, the worst job, I started as a page at CBS, and I became a game show writer. I had one period of time where I wasn't working a lot, and I became a disc jockey at a restaurant called the Hungry Tiger. That was as bad as it got. But I was never, ever going to accept the word no. And I was so determined that I was going to get where I was going to go. So here's the story I was going to tell you about Graham Junior College. We had our first career day, and I was in charge of some young new executive from ABC by the name of Don Ohlmeyer. Okay.
Oh, yeah.
You know Ohlmeyer. So yeah. Ohlmeyer became not only at one point running all of ABC Sports, but he actually at one point ran the entire network. Okay. So Ohlmeyer was about 25. I'm going to school. I'm like 21. And he says, hey, kid, here's my phone number. If you want to look for a job this summer, call me. So I called Don Ohlmeyer 25, 30, 35, 40 times. He never, ever, ever returned my phone call. Fast forward the tape. Double Dare becomes bigger than life. And I get a phone call from Disney that they're going to do their first syndicated live from Disney World 4th of July parade. And I said, who's directing this show? And they said, you ever heard of a guy by the name of Don Ohlmeyer? So Ohlmeyer comes out and I said, hi, Don, how are you? And he said, do we know each other? And I said, let me tell you a little story. So he apologized and we had a great show.
Did he hire you because you had badgered him and finally he was like, boy, you're not going to take no for an answer. I got to take you.
No, somebody else hired me before Don got to me.
Okay.
But, it was just one of those things. How many times in this industry do people promise you stuff and they almost never? I mean, here's a perfect example is the man who saw me do this show in Buffalo said, I'm going to connect you with somebody in New York who can make this happen. And the next day I got a phone call from the Schubert organization because Steve made that phone call. He's a rare bird. Most people don't ever do that stuff,
What was the best dish at the Hungry Tiger?
Going to the restaurant next door, I think, was probably it wasn't terrific. And I was not a good disc jockey doing that kind of stuff. I started my career on a station called WBMP in Elwood, Indiana. I was doing weekends from 6 to 11. I was 15 years old. And the guy who drove me up there lost his job, and I had no way to go up there. My parents were going to drive me. So some young disc jockey, his name was Dave Letterman, took my place.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, crazy,
wow.
Right?
I mean, think about all of these incredible icons that you're interwoven with in your career.
It's nuts.
Wow. So what is Nickelodeon like at the beginning? Because now we know it as this iconic American brand. But back when you are auditioning for Double Dare, you're a stand-in because somebody's saying, I don't think this thing is going to work. So what are the early days of Nickelodeon like?
I tell you why it worked. Because Geraldine Laybourne, who was running the place, hired the best people and let them do their jobs. And we were allowed to be creative, do things that had not been done on TV. They did a focus group. And the focus group said that kids wanted to have a game show. They were living vicariously through their mom and dad watching Price is Right and Wheel of Fortune, but they wanted their own. And at the time, there was a game on the playground called Truth or Dare. And they took Truth or Dare and added it to physical challenges and questions. And then the messy part, they found out that kids were always getting in trouble for getting messy. And the motto on Nick used to be the place where only kids win. And we were rewarding them for getting messy because their parents didn't want them to do that. So it was a combination of those things. And there used to be something called Playground Talk. And you were probably a part of that because you did not have cable. And so kids would go to the playground and say, there's this cool show on some network called Nickelodeon where guys jump into 5,000 pounds of baked beans. Oh, I don't have that. Well, come to my house. And I read something in Broadcasting Magazine at one point. I didn't even know broadcasting exists anymore. The three most important people in the early days of cable, first was Larry King, because he was doing the kind of interviews that nobody had seen. The second person was Gallagher, because he was the first to do comedy specials on Showtime. And they had me as number three because I got kids to tell their parents to go buy cable so they could see Nickelodeon. So it was a win-win for all of us.
That is amazing.
Yeah.
You're absolutely right. I was part of that subset of kids that would hear about Double Dare from my friends at the playground and said, we got to try to get cable. We got to try to get cable, or we got to go over to a friend's house where there is cable. It's interesting because that dovetails into, you've been in the news recently. There's been a Netflix documentary out about some darker times around Nickelodeon, but that was before you, that was after you got there. And
yeah,
so
I didn't know any of those people. I knew nothing of that stuff. We were having fun there. We were doing, it was mostly game shows. I think that if somebody was smart, we had Guts, we had Legends of the Hidden Temple, we had Double Dare. Yeah. What would you do? And I think if indeed somebody would put games on for kids, their networks would explode. But here's an interesting story. There was a lady who was in charge of casting at Nick forever. And a couple of years ago, they let her go. And she said, I need to tell you a story and you're going to freak out. I said, what's that? She said, I said to my 5-year-old granddaughter, what's your favorite show on Nickelodeon? And her granddaughter said, what's Nickelodeon? Why? Because kids are watching their phones, they're watching their iPads, and they don't know channels. They just know instantaneously what gratification they get from that phone or that iPad. So it's a different world.
It's a very different world. But I wonder, are you noticing from the people that come to see your show the essence of what entertainment and education, and I noticed the word compassion being used on the description of your show as well, that those cornerstones still draw an audience? Is just you've got to still create something that people want to watch wherever that platform is.
And they want to relive their childhood. On the last tour that I did right before COVID, we were going out. I used to sell out Palace of Auburn Hills, 20,000 people twice on a weekend. I didn't want to do that big of arena because I'm old and I can't run around like I used to. So we were doing the 3,000 to 5,000 seaters. And people would pay for meet and greets to come backstage and take pictures and schmooze for a few minutes. And I'd say, where are your kids? And they would say, oh, hell, we want to have a good time. We left the kids with a babysitter. And they would come in double tier T-shirts, and they were in their early 40s, but they grew up watching the show and they wanted to relive that part. And we do, I'll let something here, the producers get upset. But at one point, we bring out Pickett, the big nose, here in our show. And when that thing comes out, I am blown away by the reaction of the people, because it takes them right back to being 9 years old, you know?
It's so interesting that you bring up that piece of iconography, because I always thought when you saw somebody on TV picking a nose, it broke through a wall that I had never seen before. That was a kid thing. Kids joked about picking noses.
Yes.
Kids joked about other kids picking noses.
Yes.
Kids pick their own noses.
Yes.
Parents and adults can't joke about that. When I saw that, it resonated like, oh, this is a show for me,
Yes.
for kids. So I could see why that still resonates so much.
Still does. Yeah. What's the other thing? You can pick your nose, and you can pick your friends. You can pick your nose, but you can't pick your friend's nose. Yeah, that's right.
That's right. That's right. The Life and Slimes of Marc Summers is right now at the let's see, the New World Stages Theater, which is on 50th between 8th and 9th. And it looks like you're in the dressing room right now. Are you at the theater at the moment?
I am at the theater at the moment. We do. Let's see. I just did a matinee. What is today? Saturday. Yeah, we did a 2:00 matinee. And we have an 8:00 show tonight, so I don't go back home. I hang out here and hang out with the crew and everybody and have some fun. But doing 2 shows a day, because you want to do 110% for everybody who comes in. And I have to reserve my energy here before we do the next one. Sometimes I fall asleep in this chair for about an hour to kind of get my energy back. But yeah, we're having the best time ever. We're here till June 2nd.
It must give you incredible respect for Broadway performers. I always think, my goodness, what I'm seeing on that stage is so energetic and so 100%. And then I think, and they've got to do it again tomorrow and the next day and the next day, and sometimes twice a day. It's mind blowing to me.
It is. And I have a podcast, plug this to, called Marc Summers Unwraps. And I was being bombarded to do podcasts, and I started, I thought, too late. And I kept saying, no. And I finally found a team that wanted me to do it and convinced me to do it. And here was my point of view. I had to have a point of view on this thing. You go to a TV show, or you watch a TV show, you go to a Broadway show, you see a movie, you go, wow, the person doing that, they are the luckiest person in the world. And what they don't know is how hard it is to get to that point. How do you don't just become a star of a TV show or a Broadway show. It takes years. And so my whole podcast is about overcoming obstacles. We had Howie Mandel on for 2. We had Kevin Pollak on for a couple. Richard Kind, who's an amazing actor. And so we have people who are in the industry who have had tremendous success, but some people didn't. I was 34 when I got Double Dare. I had been around in LA for about 13 years before I even got a chance to do this show. And it was all timing. A friend of mine, Dave Garrison, was a ventriloquist, and he was trying to become an act, and he just kind of gave up and wanted to do something else. And he called me up and said, hey, Mark, I got an audition, but I'm not going. Do you want to go instead of me? And I said, sure. What is it? He said, some, I don't know, network called Nickelodeon. I don't know what it is. So they had auditioned 1,000 people in New York City. New York. Didn't like anybody. So they came to LA. I was the first guy to audition, and I got 3 callbacks. And I knew they were going into production in September. And one thing I used to do when I would go to an audition, I'd get the phone number of the casting director and the exec producer. And I knew they were going to start after Labor Day. And I called Mike Klinghoffer, the exec producer, and I said, are you guys picking anybody yet? And he said, funny you called. We've got it narrowed down to you and another guy, but we never saw you guys with kids, because they had grown-ups playing the part of the kids in the audition. So I came up with the idea of flying us both to New York, putting us in a studio with real live kids, play the game, and let the best man win. And so that Labor Day, they flew me and this other guy to the studio in New York. And we were both probably about the same. Here's what separated us. At the end of his audition, he said, you guys are done, or you want me to do something else? And I said, we'll be back with more Double Dare right after this. I threw the commercial. They said that was more professional, and that changed my life.
Wow.
Yeah.
That is really cool. From that young man to fighting with Burt Reynolds on The Tonight Show. Think about that.
Yeah, boy, that was a night. Holy mackerel.
Did you guys make up after that?
No.
No.
He hugged me and said, I only did that because I really like you. And then he left. And I mean, we were in the last commercial, but Jake, said, "Hey, wait, what's it going on with Burt? What happened?" And he just got in the car and drove off. I get a phone call from the New York Post the next day, and they asked what was going on, and I said it was like doing 3 rounds with Muhammad Ali. And the headline in the New York Post that next morning was "Burt goes berserk on Tonight," and to this day, I still have people stop me in the street because everybody thought it was set up. Yeah. It wasn't. He was just nuts that night and went crazy. You can go on YouTube. If you just Google Marc Summers and Burt Reynolds, you'll see what happened. And I swear to you, it was an organic thing. I'm not that good of an actor. I could have never faked what happened on that show.
Life in Slimes of Marc Summers. This is such a cool show, certainly for people of my age that grew up with Double Dare, but also if you have older children between the ages of 12 and maybe 16, 18, there's a lot of incredible messages for you in this. It's New World Stages in Manhattan. It's on 50th between 8th and 9th. They are performing through June the 2nd. There's 5 shows a week, and you can get tickets online. I highly, highly suggest it. And Marc has been very kind and generous with his time multiple times in my career, so I certainly want you guys to help support him as well with this endeavor. Marc, this was great. I had no doubt that it would be, but I have great admiration for your career and for your time that you spent with me before. So thanks so much for doing it again, man. It really means a lot.
Thank you. And thank you for being the pro that you are. I generally turn these things down because I say, if you can come up with 3 questions that have never been asked, I'll do your podcast. And most people don't know how to do that. But I know I didn't have to ask you that because you're a pro and you do your homework. So I'm applauding you. Thank you very much.
You're too kind, man. Thanks again. I hope the show was just crazy, awesome, successful for you. And I appreciate it very much.
Have a nice day. Thank you so much.